The orbital bazaar of Vale 9 always smelled like trouble, hot metal, drifting coolant, and too many secrets compressed under too much pressure. Ethan Vale had been waiting at docking ring C for 2 hours, watching crowds shift like tides around him, wondering for the 15th time why he'd ever agreed to the mission. He didn't like owing debts. He hated collecting them even more. But 40,000 credits was the difference between keeping his ship flying and losing the only home he had left. So he waited and waited. By the 3rd hour, Ethan's patience had evaporated. He stood, rubbing the bridge of his nose as a familiar, chirping laugh echoed through the corridor. "Captain Vale, my punctual human friend." Ethan turned slowly. "Torvak, you're not my friend, and you're not punctual." The four-eyed merchant skittered closer, hands fidgeting nervously around a datapad. Yes, about the payment." No, Ethan stepped forward, jaw tightening. "Not about. Not later, 40,000 credits, now." Torvak's throat sacs fluttered. "I no longer possess the funds." Ethan froze, the words hit like cold vacuum. "You're joking." Torvak winced. There were market fluctuations. A miscalculation. A rather unfortunate pirate tax. "I almost died on that run," Ethan said, voice dropping to something dangerous. "Your cargo wasn't worth my blood." Yes, which is why I offer a superior alternative." Torvak whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "A living asset, rare, valuable, quiet." Ethan's stomach twisted. "I'm not taking a slave." "Not a slave," Torvak insisted. "An indentured asset. But if you refuse, she goes to the pits on Zareth Prime. An unfortunate end for something so exquisite." Ethan closed his eyes. Damn it. Torvak knew him too well, knew he wouldn't walk away from someone being thrown into hell. "Show me," Ethan finally said. Torvak's relief was immediate as he hurried down the corridor. They descended into the lower decks, where the humidity thickened and the lights flickered like dying stars. Holding cells lined the walls, some occupied, some mercifully empty. Torvak stopped at cell 12 and opened it with a hiss. Ethan expected fear. Maybe hostility. He didn't expect her. She sat curled in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, skin faintly luminous like moonlit glass. Long, elegant ears swept back in graceful arcs, and faint lines, almost like fractured starlight, ran along her forearms. Scars, yes, but patterned, purposeful, and her eyes. A violet so bright it looked unnatural in the dim cell. "She speaks little," Torvak said cheerfully. "Does nothing unless instructed. Perfect temperament for—" "Shut up," Ethan muttered. He crouched down, careful not to get too close. "I'm Ethan," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman didn't answer, didn't even look at him directly. Just a slight shift, like her breath had caught for half a second. It was enough, Ethan stood. "Transfer her contract to me, then we're finished, forever." Torvak eagerly tapped the datapad and Ethan's neural implant chimed. Ownership transferred. The words hit him like a punch. He hated it. But the alternative was worse. "Come on," Ethan said gently, turning toward the exit. "You don't have to walk behind me, just come with me." She rose silently, still avoiding his gaze. And though she didn't walk beside him, her steps fell into rhythm with his, as if instinctively matching pace. Ethan didn't understand her, but something in the hollow quiet of her eyes told him one thing clearly. Whoever she was, whatever had happened to her, this was not a simple debt anymore. This was Ethan's ship, the Seraphine, waited in docking bay 47 like a loyal hound with missing teeth, older than most stations, patched more times than he could remember but still flying. Barely. He led the woman up the loading ramp, her steps feather-light, silent, almost ghost-like. She took in the narrow corridors with no visible reaction, no curiosity, no fear, no relief, just compliance. "I'm not activating your protocols," Ethan said once they reached the crew quarters. "I don't use them, I won't use them." Still nothing. He opened the door to a small room, a bed, a locker, a hygiene alcove, and a single dim light. "This is yours for now. If you want the bed, it's—" She walked past him and sat on the floor in the corner, folding her legs beneath her, hands resting perfectly still atop her knees. Not even trembling. Just empty, Ethan swallowed. "You don't have to stay in the corner." No response. "You don't need permission to breathe or move around. You're free to do what you want. I'm not," he exhaled sharply. "I'm not your owner, legally sure, but not in reality." A faint twitch ran through her fingers, the smallest signal of life. Then finally her voice, soft, delicate, barely there. "What do you want from me?" The question wasn't suspicious. It wasn't fearful, it was procedural. Like she was asking for instructions on how to exist. "I don't want anything from you," Ethan said quietly. Except maybe for you to be safe. She blinked once, slowly, as if her mind had to buffer the words. He knelt down, keeping distance, his voice gentler than he'd used with anyone in years. What's your name? Silence. I can't keep calling you hey or you. Another silence longer, then Lira. The name felt too beautiful for the cell he'd found her in, too soft for the scars trailing her arms, too ancient for the hollow way she said it. Lira, Ethan repeated. Okay, Lira, you can rest here. I'll be in the cockpit. She didn't respond, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge him at all. He left anyway. The Seraphine drifted through hyperspace on auto-navigation, stars smearing like white fire across the viewport. Ethan leaned back in the pilot's chair, rubbing his eyes. He'd planned a supply run, a quick refuel, maybe a drink afterward, not this. Every few minutes he glanced toward the corridor, listening for movement. There was none. Hours passed. He brought food to her door. She didn't touch it until he gave a gentle, reluctant, "Eat." Then she obeyed instantly. The request alone hadn't been enough. Command was required, something inside Ethan twisted. This wasn't freedom. This wasn't living. She'd been conditioned too long. Late that night, when hyperspace quieted to its usual hum, Ethan walked past her room and paused. The door was cracked open. Lira sat in the same corner, facing the wall, illuminated by the faint glow of the navigation lights. She wasn't asleep. He wasn't sure she knew how to sleep anymore. Something shone softly along her forearm, pale luminescent lines, arranged in shapes too precise to be scars. Ethan stepped closer. She immediately pulled her sleeve down, face turning away. Those markings, he said quietly. They aren't random. No reaction. They're beautiful, but also deliberate. Still nothing. Ethan didn't push. He just nodded and turned to go, but her voice stopped him, barely audible. They are not for beauty. He turned back slowly. Then what are they? Another long silence. Then, they were meant to identify me before everything. Before what? Before the scars, before the cell, before she'd lost her voice somewhere along the stars. Ethan sat outside her doorway, not entering, not crowding her space. Lira, whatever happened, we'll figure it out. She lifted her head slightly, violet eyes catching the faint blue of the ship lights. For the first time, she looked at him fully, not as an owner, not as a threat, but as a puzzle she didn't know how to solve. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Doing what? Kindness. A pause. I don't understand what you want. Ethan breathed out a laugh, soft, tired. I want you to be free. Lira's gaze flickered downward, as if the word hurt her more than any chain. That is not something for me, she murmured. Freedom is for other people. Not anymore, Ethan said, standing. Good night, Lira. She said nothing more, but when he walked away, she didn't look back at the wall. She watched him go. Hyperspace was supposed to be silent. It was. A warning chime pulsed through the cockpit, low, uneasy, like the ship was trying to whisper a secret. Ethan frowned at the console. Nothing was technically wrong, but the numbers felt off. Navigation drift. Minor, harmless, probably just aging calibrators. He corrected the course with a few taps, leaned back and rubbed tired eyes. He de-slept maybe an hour. His thoughts kept circling the same impossible shape. Lira. The way she moved, too smooth. The way she listened, too carefully. The way she sat like someone trained to erase herself, and the markings. No slave trader etched patterns that intricate. Someone had done it with purpose. Sometime deep into the false night of hyperspace, Ethan finally dragged himself toward his quarters. He paused at Lira's door out of habit. Silence again. He exhaled and kept walking. But when the ship shuddered suddenly under him, he spun back around. Lights flickered. Gravity fluctuated. A deep metallic groan rattled through the hull. Ethan sprinted to the cockpit. Someone was already there. Lira. Her fingers moved across the navigation controls with impossible speed, eyes scanning data Ethan hadn't even pulled up. Her expression wasn't empty anymore. It was sharp, focused, alive. What are you doing? Ethan shouted. Lira didn't look at him. Your course is wrong. My course, I calibrated manually. Yes. She finally turned to him, calm, steady, terrifyingly certain. And your calibration would have taken us directly into a Keshal ambush corridor. Ethan stared at her. What ambush corridor? The one pirates use on this route. She pointed at the glowing chart. They hide between these gravitational pockets. They wait for ships drifting off standard vectors. That's not in any official database. Correct. Ethan blinked once, twice. Lira, how do you know this? She didn't answer. Instead, she reset coordinates with a precision no smuggler, hell, no starship pilot he knew could execute. The route she plotted was longer, more obscure. and it threaded between hazard zones Ethan had never even seen on civilian charts. He felt his chest tighten. Lira, where did you learn this? A long silence. Then, I used to navigate before. Her voice thinned to a whisper. Before everything broke. Ethan stepped forward slowly, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. You piloted. For whom? Her hands stilled on the console. For people who no longer exist. The room felt suddenly too small, too cold. Lira, Ethan said carefully, I don't know who you were, but whoever trained you, they weren't merchants, and they weren't slavers. Her jaw tightened. No, they were not. Then who? She tapped the console once, final, precise. Sit down, Ethan. It wasn't a request, and strangely, he obeyed. She initiated the jump. Hyperspace folded around them in a ripple of silver, smoother than any transition Ethan had ever experienced. Almost elegant. Only someone with elite training could execute a jump like that. Someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He watched her profile in the faint blue glow of the console. Hers was not the face of a broken slave. It was the face of a woman remembering who she used to be. They sat in silence for a long while as the ship stabilized. Finally, Ethan leaned forward, voice low. You saved our lives. Lira didn't move, didn't react. You did, he said again, softer this time. I didn't see that ambush coming. I did not save your life, she murmured. I repaid a debt. He frowned. What debt? You deactivated my compliance protocols. That created imbalance. Now I am returning equilibrium. That's not how kindness works, Lira. That is how survival works. Her violet eyes finally met his. I do not understand your version. Ethan swallowed hard. So you're saying you helped me because you think you owe me something? No, a beat because the universe does. He stared at her, confused. What does that mean? But Lira had already turned away, drawing her knees up, folding in on herself again. 3 hours after Lira altered their course, Ethan began to relax, just enough to believe the worst was behind them. He was wrong. The Seraphine jolted violently as alarms screamed across the cockpit. Red lights strobed through the corridor. A proximity alert blared, sharp and urgent. Ethan sprinted forward, cursing under his breath. What now? The answer appeared on the radar before he finished speaking. 2 ships, fast, predatory. Running silent, not pirates, hunters. Damn it, Ethan hissed, flipping activation switches as the Seraphine shuddered under another kinetic burst. Shields dropped from 60 to 40% in seconds. How did they find us? He muttered. A soft voice behind him answered. They weren't looking for you. Ethan turned sharply. Lira stood in the doorway, hair loose around her shoulders, violet eyes calm in a way that scared him more than the attackers. What does that mean? He asked. She stepped closer, studying the tactical readout. They are not hunters, she murmured. They're reclaimers. That sounds worse. It is. Another blast rocked the ship. Ethan fought the controls, forcing the Seraphine into a sharp roll. They want you, he realized, not him, her. Lira didn't deny it. They found my biometrics. They must have access to old registries. Old registries of what? Ethan snapped. Lira didn't answer, because at that moment the Seraphine's rear hull took a direct hit. The lights died. The console flickered. Ethan felt the ship groan beneath his hands like it was preparing to fall apart. We're not going to outrun them, he said. Weapons online in 5 seconds. Don't engage, Lira said sharply. We don't exactly have a choice. You do. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Listen to me, Ethan. He froze, not because of the authority in her tone, but because she'd said his name for the first time. Lira pointed to a dense scattering of debris ahead, tiny fragments of long-destroyed structures drifting in a slow spiral. There. That field will disrupt their sensors. And ours, he said, will be flying blind. I will guide you. Ethan stared at her. You can't navigate visually at these speeds. No one can. I can. There was no arrogance in her voice, no doubt. Just fact, he didn't have time to argue. He shoved the throttle forward. Metallic debris filled the viewport, twisting shards, drifting supports, fragments of ancient satellites scattered like broken constellations. The Seraphine plunged into the field, scraping past structures that should never have been that close. The hunters followed, their pulses slicing through the dark like spears of white light. Left, Lira said softly. Ethan turned. A narrow corridor of twisted metal opened before them. Down. He dropped the ship into a descent so sharp his stomach lurched. Roll. He rolled, he didn't question, he just trusted. And somehow, impossibly, Lira's instincts were perfect. Every adjustment she called out led them through another death corridor with millimeter precision. "What is this place?" Ethan asked through clenched teeth. "Ruins of an observation relay," she murmured. "Destroyed during a conflict." "What conflict?" Silence then, "The one that scattered my people." Before Ethan could ask more, the ship lurched violently. The hunters had fired blind into the debris field, their pulses hammering nearby structures. Shockwaves tore through the wreckage. A massive panel sheared loose, spinning toward them like a guillotine. "Brace!" Ethan yelled, but Lira moved faster. She leapt across the cockpit, slammed her hand onto the emergency stabilizer, and yanked Ethan's chair backward just as the serrated debris sliced through the space where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. The metal screamed against the hull, leaving glowing gouges. Ethan stared at her, breathing hard. "You just saved." She interrupted. "Your life is not the priority right now." That's a terrible thing to say to someone you just saved. It is the truth. Another explosion, shields at 15%. Ethan made a decision he wasn't sure he'd survive. "Lira, if you were guiding us before, I need more than instinct. I need to know what you know." Lira met his gaze. For the first time, she didn't look away. "My training," she said quietly, "was not meant for ordinary citizens." Ethan swallowed. "What were you?" "Someone who was expected to command fleets," she whispered. "Someone who was taught every route, every anomaly, every blind corner of this galaxy before she was old enough to speak in council sessions." Ethan blinked. Council sessions, fleet command, those were not the words of a refugee, or a wanderer or an indentured nobody. "You were important," Ethan said softly. Lira's eyes shimmered pain, memory, and something like defiance. "I was born into a role I did not choose, and I lost everything that came with it." He felt the weight of it, the grief, the history, the impossible distance between who she had been and who she was now. But there was no time for comfort. The hunters fired again, wild shots, but close enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Ethan gripped the controls. "Tell me where to go." Lira stepped beside him, placing her hand on the console, her voice steady. "There is a narrow discharge channel beneath the debris. If we reach it before they recalibrate, their ships will overload trying to match our path. And if we miscalculate, we die." "Great." She looked at him then, not empty, not hollow, but fierce. "Trust me, Ethan Vale." He didn't think, didn't debate, didn't weigh the odds. He pushed the Seraphine into the dive. The discharge channel was barely wider than the ship. Static charge danced across the hull like lightning spiders. The hunters tried to follow, but their engines flared too brightly, their cores destabilizing in the confined electromagnetic space. Ethan heard one overload behind them, a brief flash, then silence. The second ship veered off, systems fried. They had escaped. Barely, Ethan let the Seraphine drift, hands trembling on the controls. His breath came in sharp pulls, then he looked at Lira. Her chest rose and fell with controlled calm, but her hands trembled faintly, just enough for him to notice. "You okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then, "I remember this route," she whispered. "I flew it once, long ago. With people I failed to save." Ethan's voice softened. "Then you saved someone this time." Lira, the Seraphine drifted out of the electromagnetic debris field, battered but alive. The hull still hummed with residual static, sparks flickering along scorched panels. Ethan watched the stars settle back into their usual calm, though his hands were still shaking faintly. Lira stood beside him, her posture straight but her eyes unfocused, as if she were somewhere else entirely, somewhere buried under years of memory she hadn't chosen to keep. "Lira," Ethan said gently, "we need repairs and answers." Her gaze snapped back into the present. "There is a place," she murmured, "far beyond mapped lanes, a refuge built by those who fled the Sundering." "The Sundering," Ethan repeated. "That thing you mentioned earlier, the conflict that—" "Yes," a faint tremor passed through her voice, "the one that shattered everything." Ethan hesitated, he wasn't sure how far he could push. "Is that where you're from?" Lira turned her eyes toward the forward viewport, toward stars that suddenly seemed heavier with history. "I was born in a palace that no longer exists," she said, "raised for a life that burned before I could live it." She paused. "But some pieces of us survived, hidden, waiting." Ethan exhaled slowly. "And you think they're still out there?" "I know they are," she whispered, "because if they were gone, no one would still be hunting me." Ethan felt something cold settle under his ribs. This wasn't a random escapee. This wasn't a refugee. This was someone whose very existence threatened someone powerful enough to command hunter-killers. "Okay," he said quietly. Tell me where to set a course. The coordinates she gave him didn't match any registry, any star map, any smuggler route Ethan had ever seen. It wasn't a location so much as a set of gravitational harmonics, an encoded path through uncharted space. How did you even get these? Ethan asked. I remembered. He blinked. From childhood. She hesitated. From before that. Before that, what kind of navigation training started before a person could speak? Ethan didn't ask. Some answers needed to surface on their own. He input the harmonics. The ship vibrated, engines groaning as if the Seraphine knew she wasn't meant to fly somewhere like this. Hyperspace opened, not in the usual smooth transition, but in a fractured shimmer like slipping between broken mirrors. Ethan gripped the controls. Lira, where exactly are we going? A place my people called Vale, she said softly. The sanctuary of echoes. Something in the way she spoke the name made Ethan's skin prickle. Like it was sacred, like it was forbidden. When they emerged from hyperspace, Ethan's breath caught. At first he thought they were approaching an abandoned moon. Then he realized it wasn't natural. A station, massive, ancient, built with sweeping architecture that curved like the rings of a dying star. Soft light glowed from beneath its fractured exterior. Vines of metallic ivy wrapped its supports, shimmering faintly with stored energy. It looked half ruins, half cathedral. Saints, Ethan whispered. Lira, this place is, beautiful doesn't even cover it. It is broken, she murmured, but not dead. As they approached, faint signals pinged the ship, a language Ethan's translator couldn't parse. Do I need to answer that? Ethan asked. No, Lira stepped closer to the console. They're not asking for you. The station's lights brightened. A narrow corridor opened in the side of the structure like the place itself was breathing awake. Ethan swallowed. You, sure we're welcome. Lira's expression softened, fear mixed with something else. Pain maybe, or longing. I don't know, she admitted, but I have to try. They docked in a cavernous bay that looked untouched for decades. Dust drifted in shimmering particles through shafts of artificial light. Old banners hung from the upper rafters, faded symbols Ethan didn't recognize, but somehow understood belonged to something grand. Lira stepped forward. Ethan followed, but she paused at the bottom of the ramp. You should stay behind me. That's not happening. She looked at him, really looked, violet eyes softening. Ethan, my people are cautious. They have reason to be. A human beside me may be seen as. She searched for the word, complicated. Well, Ethan said with a faint grin. Lucky for us, I specialize in complicated. Lira blinked slowly like she wasn't sure whether to protest or be grateful. They moved forward together. A sound stirred above, soft footsteps, whisper-light. Figures emerged from dim alcoves surrounding the walkway. Tall, slender, luminous-skinned like Lira, each with the same long, elegant ears and faintly glowing markings. But unlike Lira's, theirs were simpler, geometric, understated. Her patterns had been intricate, royal, unique. One woman stepped forward, older. Her markings shimmered like silver in the low light, a rank Ethan couldn't decipher. She stared at Lira for a long, aching moment. Then her eyes widened, her knees buckled, and she dropped to the ground. High lineage, the woman whispered, voice shaking. By the light of the first stars, I never believed we would see your kind again. Lira froze. Rise, she said faintly. Please, I am not. You are, the woman insisted, lifting her gaze. The markings on your skin, they are not borne by any common house. They are the crest of Morvath, the imperial line. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Imperial, he looked at Lira. She looked back, terrified, vulnerable, and suddenly small in a way he had never seen from her. Ethan, she whispered, voice barely audible. I didn't want this. The others began to kneel in a wave, heads bowed. Lira stepped backward, panic flickering in her eyes like trapped starlight. I'm not who you think, she said hurriedly. I'm not, I can't be. The elder woman rose slowly, taking Lira's hand with reverent caution. You are the last heir, she said, and the hunters who chase ghosts have finally revealed why. Ethan moved to Lira's side, close enough for her to feel him there, but not close enough to intrude. Her breath trembled. She wasn't ready for this, she hadn't chosen this. Lira, he murmured, I'm here. She turned her face toward his voice and something broke softly inside her. Not pain, relief. The elder studied him. A human stands with you, she noted. The elder led them into the heart of the sanctuary, a circular hall lined with crystalline pillars that pulsed with faint white-blue light. It felt less like architecture and more like stepping inside a memory. The air itself hummed, the sound warm and low like a distant choir. Lira walked slowly, her steps hesitant, as if the structure recognized her and she didn't know how to handle being recognized in return. Ethan stayed beside her, close enough for support, distant enough to honor her space. The elder, whose name was Vale, touched one of the crystal pillars. Light flared, then rippled through the room, forming a holographic constellation map. Ethan had never seen anything like it. Shifting stars, ancient trade routes, lost territories, and then one region flickered red. "That," Vale said, "is where the sundering began." Lira's breath caught. Ethan felt her fingers twitch near his hand. Vale continued, voice soft but unwavering. "Your family ruled with diplomacy, knowledge, and unity, but there were those who saw strength only in domination. They wanted an empire of conquest, not culture. They staged a coup, one that wiped out nearly every member of the imperial line." Lira's violet eyes dimmed. "I remember the fire," she whispered. "I remember running." Ethan felt her tremble ever so slightly. Without thinking, he placed his hand near hers, not touching, just offering. She moved her hand closer until their fingers brushed. It wasn't romance. It wasn't strategy. It was survival. Vale nodded gently. "They hunted your lineage across the stars, believing all heirs dead. We hid here, preserving what knowledge we could, waiting." Lira shook her head. "Waiting for what? I was 8. I didn't know how to rule." "I don't know now." "You don't need to know," Vale said. "You only need to choose." Lira blinked. "Choose what?" "Whether you will run again or stand." Silence flooded the hall. Lira stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't. You expect me to rebuild everything. I spent 15 years in chains. I can barely sleep. I can barely breathe." Vale approached her slowly. "You misunderstand. We do not expect you to lead an empire." Lira looked up, startled. Vale smiled softly. "We expect you to inspire one." Ethan exhaled, tension leaving his chest. This he knew she could do, not alone, but with help. Vale turned to Ethan. "And you, human, why are you here?" Ethan hesitated before answering honestly. "Because she asked me to stay." Lira's eyes shifted toward him, something warm flickering inside them. Vale studied him a moment longer. "You carry no markings, no lineage, no destiny written in ancient scripts," she said. "Yet she trusts you. That alone gives you value in this rebuilding." Ethan coughed. "Well, I'm useful with a wrench, too." A faint laugh escaped Lira, quiet but real. It was the first time Ethan had heard her laugh, and he felt something in his chest unlock. The sanctuary's lights dimmed suddenly. A sharp tone echoed through the chamber, low, urgent. Vale stiffened. "They found us." Lira's blood ran cold. "How this station is hidden." "It was," Vale said. "But when you arrived, the harmonics shifted. Your bloodline activated the old systems." Her eyes darkened. "And someone else was waiting for that signal." A hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. A tall figure with angular features, silver hair tied back, and markings deliberately burned away. His eyes were cold, calculated. "Lira," he said, voice filled with a cruel familiarity. "After all these years, the last ember still burns." Lira went pale. "Uncle Varin." Ethan's stomach dropped. Uncle, the architect of the sundering. The man who ordered the slaughter of her family. Varin's image turned to Ethan. And the human, how quaint, a piece of debris clinging to royalty. Ethan stepped forward, jaw clenched. "You want her, you'll have to get through me." Varin smirked. "Oh, I intend to." Vale slammed her hand against a console. "Cut the feed." The hologram vanished. Vale faced Lira, breath sharp. "His forces will arrive within hours, but he cannot attack openly, not yet. Not with witnesses, not with your lineage revealed." Lira looked confused. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," Vale said. "You only need to speak." Ethan understood before she did. "You're the heir," he said softly. "You still are. If you step forward now, publicly, your people will rally, and he'll lose the shadows he's been hiding in." Lira's throat tightened. "I'm not ready." Vale stepped aside, giving her space. "No one ever is." Ethan turned to her, voice low. "Lira, I've seen you navigate a collapsing debris field blind. I've seen you face hunters who wanted you dead. You survived slavery, war, and loss I can't imagine. If anyone is ready, it's you." Her eyes lifted to his. "What if I fail?" Ethan moved closer, slow, gentle. "Then I fail with you." Lira inhaled sharply, as if those words were a blow and a salvation at once. "You would do that?" she whispered. He didn't hesitate. "I already did." Their foreheads didn't touch. Their hands didn't intertwine fully. But they leaned toward each other, drawn by something neither had the courage to name yet. Then Lira stepped forward. Her voice steadied. Her posture straightened. Her markings glowed brighter than Ethan had ever seen. "All right," she said. "Prepare the message. If my uncle wants to erase our history, then let the galaxy hear the truth." Saravel bowed her head. Ethan moved beside Lira. And together, side by side, they recorded a broadcast that would echo through star systems, awakening memories long buried, igniting sparks in scattered hearts, and shattering the silence that Varen had relied upon for 80 years. When the message finished, Lira looked at Ethan